Today our case brings us to Dublin City, the capital of Ireland, and to an area known as Ballyfermot, which is a suburb located 7 kilometres west of the city centre and south of Phoenix Park. The Grand Canal is the southernmost of a pair of canals. It was constructed in the late 18th century and is now a recreational waterway that passes along the south side of Ballyfermot, leading to outside Dublin, linking up with the River Shannon in the west of Ireland, via Tullamore and a number of other villages and towns. One of these villages is called Ardclough in the parish of Kill in County Kildare. It is the burial place of Arthur Guinness, who gave us the pint of Guinness, which is famous worldwide. On the evening of Saturday, the 16th of January 2016, a couple were walking along the canal at Ardclough when they saw a grey suitcase floating in the water near the edge. The suitcase looked new and this struck them as unusual. They managed to reach out and grab it, and curiosity got the better of them, and so they decided to open it. What they discovered inside is not for the faint-hearted. Inside, they found a plastic bag that seemed to contain skin and blood. The man immediately called the Gardaí to tell them what they had found. Officers from nearby Leaslip Garda station arrived on the scene not long after, and they would realise that the contents of the suitcase were the torso of a large frame man. This discovery began an investigation straight away, with the Garda Technical Bureau and Garda Sub-Aqua team were to be called in not only to examine the torso but to search for further body parts. The Deputy State Pathologist, Dr. Michael Curtis, determined on site that the victim had died within days of finding the suitcase. Based on interviewing the locals, it was determined that the suitcase had been seen in the water at 9 a.m. that morning also. The torso was removed to Naas General Hospital for post-mortem, and it was determined that he had not been shot in the body or stabbed. Identification was going to be left up to DNA, as still no head or hands had been recovered at this stage, and cause of death could not be determined. The Gardaí set about finding out who the victim was and where the murder occurred, starting with looking into recent missing persons reports. The pathologist determined that the body was dismembered using a power tool, as the cuts were so precise and clean. An appeal was made to the public, and businesses were contacted about purchases of hand tools in recent days. It was not just for local businesses but for other counties, as Ardclough sits near the border of Kildare and Dublin. The Gardaí did think the killing might have been gang-related or had a criminal element to it, because of the nature of which the body was found. A breakthrough came on the 19th of January when DNA that was taken from the body matched to a woman whose son she had reported missing on the 16th of January, and it came back with an exact match. The man's name was Kenneth O'Brien, a 33-year-old father of one who came from Ballyfermot originally. Kenneth was described as a respectable family man, standing at 6'2", with a stocky build and a beard. Kenneth was a JCB driver and a diesel fitter who would go to Australia in 2013 to earn more money for his family, while his partner Emer Dunn stayed in Ireland with their son. They had been together 15 years and were mad about each other. He would travel back and forth from Australia, making sure that he did not miss his son's birthday and of course Christmas. But the back and forth took its toll, and so in December 2015, returning from Perth in Australia, he decided to stay in Ireland for good. His little family got a house in Clondalkin in Dublin and settled into family life. Emer would say that on the morning of Friday the 15th of January, she kissed Kenneth goodbye. She was dropping their son off at her mother's before heading on to work. Kenneth told her that he had work in Limerick that day and so he would be home late. Limerick is around 2.5 hours away from Dublin. Throughout the morning, Emer and Kenneth kept in contact through text. Kenneth asking if Emer got to work okay, as it was a cold and icy morning, and of course Emer showing the same concern, as she knew Kenneth would be on the road also. At around 1:30 p.m, Kenneth stopped responding, and when she rang him, his phone was off, which she found worrying. In the early hours of Saturday morning at around 3:30 a.m, Emer would receive a text message from Kenneth. It was from an unknown number, but it stated that it was Kenneth texting, and that he had lost his phone and was staying overnight in a hotel. Then later on that morning, she received another text from the same number, stating, quote, "That's it, I'm done, I'm leaving. You care more about our son and your family than me. I've met someone else. She came to Ireland yesterday. I met her today. I'm going with her." Emer was immediately suspicious of this message. The tone and language in the text was totally not Kenneth. She noted that he never used their son's name and his punctuation was all off. He was very particular in that way. Emer did search their house to see if he did bring any clothes and his passport. While no clothes were missing, she could not find his passport. She began then ringing around his friends and family, and what she learned was that the Limerick job had been called off on the Thursday evening by Kenneth. One of Kenneth's close friends, Paul Wells Sr., told Emer that Kenneth had met someone else in Australia, and they had been together for a while, before he returned to Ireland for good. Wells then showed Emer text messages and photographs of this woman and Kenneth together, including intimate pictures. Wells said that if she was going to report Kenneth missing, that he wanted his name kept out of it. Emer went to Kenneth's family and they decided together that they would go to Garda and report him missing. Garda made a statement after the discovery of the body and identifying it as Kenneth. They said that he was a family man and there was no reason found as to why he would be killed. There was nothing to suggest that he was in fear of his life and he was not involved in any criminal activity to their knowledge. He was just a normal man going about his business. The Gardaí examined his mobile phone and computer activities. It showed that on the 21st of December he had received some threatening text messages. They felt that whatever was going on, it was to do with his personal life and not anything to do with being involved with criminals. Gardaí also contacted police in Australia to see if anything had happened to Kenneth while he was living in Perth that may have led to his murder here in Ireland. A search of his house was also made, but this came up with nothing. They also struggled with the timeline of his movements in the hours before he was murdered. Emer had taken his car that morning to travel to work, so Gardaí thought he might have been picked up by someone, so therefore Kenneth may have known his killer. Of course, with every case there are rumours, and word was going around that Kenneth was involved with another woman who was connected to a well-known criminal. Another rumour was that he was in business with this criminal and it had gone sour. Of course the newspapers ran with this possible motive and they speculated that Kenneth, who grew up with the now known criminals, had been taken advantage of as he had money and was approached to invest as such in criminal business while he was living in Australia. But when he decided to come home for good, this ruined relations between the criminal gang and Kenneth, and so the gang planned and carried out his murder. In saying all this, I will reiterate, Kenneth was not into violence or drugs, and so the Gardaí really did feel it was personal. On Sunday the 24th of January, the Garda Sub-Aqua team would make a significant finding in the canal, 10 kilometres upstream from where Kenneth's torso was found. They found a bag containing human limbs. The following day, 2 more bags were found in the area, one which contained Kenneth's severed head. All 3 bags that were weighed down with bricks were removed from the canal and forensically examined. Again, 14 kilometres away from here, pieces of a power tool were recovered in the Royal Canal near Maynooth in County Kildare. The Royal Canal is the sister canal to the north of the Grand Canal. Once the parts of the body were recovered, it showed that Kenneth had been shot in the head and no other injuries were sustained, including that he had not been restrained or held for a period of time before his death. 300 lines of inquiry were being investigated at this stage. The public's response to the murder was second to none. The Gardaí pulled out all the stops between local searches and door-to-door inquiries. They even travelled to Australia to double-check that Kenneth had not been in trouble over there, officially and unofficially. The Gardaí that spoke with people that knew Kenneth described him as a hard worker, that wanted to provide for his family, had no dealings with any unsavoury characters and was never in trouble in Australia. A team of 80 officers worked around the clock trying to find the location of where Kenneth had been killed. Kenneth's bank records were examined and they noted that over €50,000 had been transferred into his friend's bank account over a period of 18 months before Kenneth's death. This friend was Paul Wells Sr., the same man that told Emer that Kenneth was involved with another woman and wanted his name kept out of the inquiry. Wells was known to Garda and was known to be a hired muscle man for local criminal gangs in Dublin. This went with the notion that Kenneth was involved in criminal activity and was handing over large sums of money to Wells to get a return on an investment which involved drugs. On the 3rd of February, hundreds of mourners attended Kenneth's funeral. He was described fondly as a prankster who was built like a brick and a bit of all right, which to everyone that's not Irish translates to handsome. His family thanked the public for the lovely cards, flowers and outpouring of sympathy that was shown to them and his partner Emer and their son. As Kenneth was being removed from the church for burial, his 4-year-old son cried out, "Dada," which would absolutely break your heart. Soon after, another break in the case would come in the form of a man presenting himself at Leixlip Garda station, telling Gardaí that he had disposed of a chainsaw as well as a chain and blade across 2 locations and timelines in Kildare that January. His name was Paul Wells Jr., the son of Paul Wells Sr. Wells Jr. was arrested the next day and Wells Sr.'s house was raided at the same time and Sr. was also arrested. Over the next few days, the Gardaí would realise that Jr. was afraid of his father, but the weight of what he knew about his father outweighed what had happened to Kenneth. 14 interviews with Gardaí revealed that Sr. was a monster and a psychopath who would go to great lengths to protect himself, and that the family were stuck in the middle of doing right by Sr. and protecting him, or by Kenneth and his family and telling the Gardaí what they knew. Wells Jr. told Gardaí that on the 16th of January in the evening, and after Kenneth's body was found, he met Sr. at the Tesco car park in Selbridge in County Kildare. They went for a drive towards Straffan village in County Kildare. Wells Sr. was so on edge that Jr. feared that he would be shot. They pulled up the car on Sallins Road, Sr. claiming he needed a pee. He went to the boot of the car and retrieved several bags which he threw into the water. Jr. admitted that he had helped by throwing the motor of a chainsaw in also, but didn't know that it had been used to dismember Kenneth's body. He said that he did it out of fear of his father, and he didn't come forward sooner for the same fear. When Wells Sr. was questioned about motive, he said that Kenneth had been pressuring him to kill his partner Emer, so he could go back to Australia and bring his son with him. He alleged that on the day of the murder, Sr. and Kenneth had got into an argument. Kenneth pulled out a gun and Wells Sr. managed to take it from him, and in turn shot him in the head. Afterwards he panicked as he couldn't move the body and so decided to cut up the body using Kenneth's own chainsaw, which he had lent to Wells Sr., it was reported. Wells Jr., when asked about the €50,000 that Kenneth had given Wells Sr., he said that Kenneth was a trusting man and kind, and he gave it to Wells Sr. for safekeeping. But Sr. had spent the money and therefore couldn't give it back and so killed Kenneth instead. Wells Jr. said that his father was a sick individual who was obsessed with money, especially other people's money. Paul Wells Sr. was a short, stocky guy and a father to 5 children, and had a long violent criminal history which included the Dublin underworld and the IRA. He trained as a butcher and it was said that he bred miniature pedigreed rabbits. He was also named as a suspect in the killing of Desi Fox, a bookmaker who was shot to death in 1990 as he made his way to a race meeting in the Curragh, in which a large quantity of cash was stolen. Wells Sr. also served 7 years in prison for firearm offences. When Wells Sr. was brought in for questioning in connection with Kenneth's death, he denied any involvement, saying he last saw him on the 11th of January when he met him for a coffee. He made out Kenneth was a secretive person that had an eye for the women, and said that Emer had caught him cheating in the past, which Emer would admit at the trial that this was true. She would also admit that she had no idea that he earned up to 60,000 Australian dollars after tax. When asked was Kenneth mean, she would say he was cautious. Wells Sr. also said that Kenneth could be volatile with drinking him and had many a run-in with people. Wells Sr. really had nothing good to say about Kenneth and continued to tell Garda that he had nothing to do with his murder. However, when confronted with the statements his son had given, he began to talk. Wells Sr. claimed that Kenneth had offered him €20,000 to kill Emer, so like I said, he could return to Australia with their son. He said he refused to carry out the hit and withdrew the money Kenneth had given to him as payment for the hit and handed it back to him in cash. He said that this didn't deter Kenneth to try and get the job done, and so when he arrived at the house on the 15th of January carrying a gun to be used to carry out the killing of Emer, an argument occurred in the back garden of Wells Sr.'s house. He claimed then that he shot Kenneth in self-defence using the gun. The state pathologist would later say Kenneth had been shot with the muzzle of the gun directly against the back of his head when the shot was fired. As panic ensued after the killing, Wells Sr. knew his son would be home soon, so he went to the garden shed to retrieve the chainsaw that Kenneth had lent him months before. He removed all of Kenneth's clothes before rolling and dragging his body to the bottom of the garden near the back wall, so no neighbours could see what he was about to do. It took Wells Sr. 20 minutes just to start the chainsaw, but when he did, he obviously put his butchering skills in use. He dismembered Kenneth on the ground and then went inside his house to change his clothes. When he came back out, he put the arms, legs and head into plastic sacks, forgetting to put the hands in, which he left on a shelf in the shed. These hands were never recovered. He wrapped the torso in plastic and put it in a suitcase. He thought about burying the body parts, but he didn't have a shovel, so he decided to dump the body parts in the Grand Canal instead. When Wells Sr. was charged with Kenneth's murder, he responded that he was responsible for the killing, but it was self-defence. When he appeared in court for the official charge of murder, he pleaded not guilty and he was remanded in custody. The trial would not take place until October 2018, when a jury was sworn in before Justice Michael White at the Central Criminal Court in Dublin. The trial was expected to last 6 weeks. Emer was brought to the stand and asked about Kenneth. She admitted that she didn't know what he earned and that he had cheated on her in the past. When it was put to her that while Kenneth said he was home for good, he had told his employer in Australia he'd be back, Emer would say that was typical of Kenneth. The defence also questioned Emer about how aware she was of Kenneth's affairs, specifically about a woman a few years previously. She said she became aware of it as this woman had been with him when they were involved in a car accident. As a result, Emer had got someone she knew to hack into Kenneth's emails, and all the evidence was there that he was being unfaithful. Emer confronted this woman, and this caused friction as this same woman was connected to a well-known criminal who confronted Kenneth and threatened him, and this is why he got involved with Wells Sr., using him for protection. Emer was also questioned about a voice activation recorder that Kenneth had placed in their home unknown to her. She said that Kenneth was into electronic gadgets, but admitted it wasn't a normal thing to do. When it came to the money, Kenneth transferred from his account into Wells Sr.'s account 10 times, which totalled €48,000. He had also transferred money into another account of his own, Emer's accounts and some family members. The total amount transferred out of his account came to around €90,000. Wells would slowly but surely withdraw all money, leaving only €300 in the bank. On Tuesday, the 6th of November 2018, after just 5 hours of deliberations, Wells Sr. was found guilty of Kenneth's murder. He was then in turn sentenced to life in prison. Kenneth's family gave a family impact statement, saying that the Kenneth that was portrayed in the trial was not the Kenneth they knew and loved. He was a hard worker from a young age. He did find it hard to express himself, but they always understood him. Emer also gave a statement saying no mother should have to do what I had to do, and that was to tell their beautiful 4-year-old son that their dad was dead. When Wells was being led out of the courtroom after sentencing, he looked at Emer and said, "I'm sorry." Paul Wells Jr. would face trial also in 2019 for impeding the investigation into Kenneth's murder. He pleaded not guilty, stating that he had no idea at the time that his father had used it to cut up a body and did not know he had taken a life. Wells Jr. also denied that the €11,000 he received from his father after the disposal of the chainsaw parts was payment for doing so. He said it was money towards looking after his mother. Wells Jr. was found guilty and was sentenced to 3 years in prison, with the last 18 months suspended. The true motive for the killing of Kenneth has never been answered fully, unfortunately, as with many cases I've covered. While Kenneth wasn't picture perfect, and for what we know of him, he made mistakes, but he had a partner that loved him despite his indiscretions, a son that loved him and who is now growing up without him, and finally a family that loved him dearly. Rest in peace, Kenneth. If you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and thank you.